If you are a beginner in Excel, this tutorial is not for you. You can only keep watching if you want to create complex functions like a piece of cake. I am Nabil Mourad. In this tutorial, I create a function of 14 levels of nesting to solve a work situation. To get the logic of the function, I break it down into small digestible parts. Then I put all the parts together to build a stunning single cell report function. Let's see the work situation. In this worksheet, I have in column B a list of customers. And then I have the quantity sold for each customer in each year from 2017 to 2021. And because I recorded the quantity at 3 occurrences in 2017, then I have 3 columns corresponding to the quantity in 2017. And I have multiple columns for the subsequent years as well. My goal is to create a single cell report like this one, where I have in the left column, I have the row headers, the customer name, and then I have one single occurrence of each year, and I have the total quantity sold for each customer. So if I look at the total sales for Adidas in 2017, that's the result of adding the 3 numbers in row number 3 from column C to column E. I want to do the same for each client in each year. I start by breaking down the logic for the function I'll be creating. I go to the preparation worksheet. In the top row of my source data, I have the years. But because I have immersion center functionality applied, then the year is entered in one single cell, and it spans over multiple columns. In order to add up the quantity conditionally for each year, I need to have column headers for each column. And to do that, I'm going to create a function that copies the top row. When I copy the top row, then the blank cells will show a 0. So if I type an equal sign, I click and drag from C2 to Q2. When I hit enter, then I get 2017, which is the value of cell C2, and then for the subsequent cells, I get 0 and 0. Then I get 2018, which is the value in F2, and then I get a set of 0. In order to add up the quantity, I want to replace the zeros by the corresponding year, and I'll be doing this by using a scan function. The scan function scans an array, and it will be scanning the top row by applying a lambda function to each value and returns an array that has the intermediate values. Difficult to understand? Let's simplify it. I'll be typing equal scan. The scan function requires an initial value, and I'll be providing a 0 for the initial value, and then I type a comma. Where is the array? The array will be all this top row from C2 to Q2. And then comma, now I need to provide a lambda function. The scan function is a lambda helper function. So let's create the function and explain it. I type lambda, I hit the tab key. I'll be providing 2 parameters. Let's call them x, y. X will correspond to the initial value. Y will correspond to each value in the array C2 to Q2. And then comma, what's the function you want to apply for each value in this array? I'll be using an if function. If, and then I hit tab. If y is greater than x, comma, what do you want? I want the y. Otherwise, I want the x. I close the bracket for the if function. I close the bracket for the lambda function. I close the bracket for the scan function. I'm going to hit enter to test, and then I explain the concept of the scan function. When I hit enter, I would have replaced the zeros by the corresponding year. So let's understand this function. The scan function has an initial value of 0. Then the x of the lambda function is the 0 as a beginning. It will acquire a different value along the way. And then for the array from C2 to Q2, that will be represented by the y of the lambda function. When I start, the x will have a value of 0, the initial value, and the y will have a value of 2017 coming from cell C2. Then in this case, the y is greater than the x. Then return the y, and I get 2017. For the next cell, the x acquires the new value of 2017, and the y has a value of 0. Then the y is not greater than the x, so it returns the x, which is 2017. Now the new value for the x is 2017, and that is repeated for the next one. Let's move to the value in F2. F2 has a value of 2018, the x is 2017, the y is 2018, the y is greater than the x, then it returns 2018, and so on. So the scan function returns the intermediate values, the x and y, with every calculation on the array, acquire a new value. In preparation for creating my final report, I need to create the top row of the final report. These are the column headers. These are the years without any duplicate values. And I'm going to use a toRow function to do that. So I type equal toRow, and then I hit tab. toRow of this range from C2 to Q2. You will be surprised when I close the bracket and hit enter, I will get the same result like A. But the reason I use the toRow function is because it has a second argument that allows me to eliminate the 0. So if I put it in the edit mode F2, and then I hit backspace and I type comma 1, I will be excluding the 0, and I get one single occurrence of each year. For the final result, where I want to add up the quantity for each client in each year, I will be creating an array, and this array consists of 5 columns, 1 column for each year, and 7 rows, 1 row for each client. So I'm going to create a function that returns the number of columns I need, and I create another function that returns the number of rows. So for D, I'll be typing equal columns, and then I hit tab. Columns of what? Columns of the function above. I use the spilled array symbol to select it, and when I hit enter, I get 5. What about the number of rows I need for the final result? I type equal rows, and then I hit tab. I want the rows corresponding to the number of clients, so I select the clients from B3 to B9. I close the bracket, and when I hit enter, I get 7. Another function that I'll be naming f, and I'll use it in the final step of the report. This one will create the row labels for the final report. Then I'll be typing equal sign, and I select from B2 down to B9. I hit enter, and I get the row labels for the final report. I created these functions one by one, but all these functions will be created and named following the letter that you see in column B, and I'll be doing that inside the let function. So let's create our let function in cell S2. I type equal let. The let function allows me to create variable and assign values to these variables. I'll be creating the variables A, B, C, D, E, F, and I'll be assigning the same values that I used in column C. Let's start. I can expand the formula bar. I use the shortcut Ctrl-Shift-U, and I start creating my first variable. I hit Alt-Enter to move to the next line. A, comma. The variable A has the value from C2 to Q2. I type a comma, Alt-Enter. The next variable B, I type a comma. This one will be storing the scan function. Then I type scan, the same function that I created before. My initial value is 0, comma. The array that I want to scan is from C2 to Q2, but because I already gave it a name A, then I can use A, comma, and now my lambda function, I hit the tab key. I want x, comma, y, comma, the function, the conditional if function that I just explained. I type if, and I hit the tab key. Y is greater than x, comma, I want the y, otherwise I want the x. I close the bracket for the if, close the bracket for the lambda, close the bracket for the scan, type a comma, and then hit Alt Enter. My next variable that will return the column header for the final report in which I see the years without any duplicates. I'll call it C, and then I type a comma, and for this one I use the toRow function. I type toRow, and then I hit Tab. toRow of what? C2 to Q2, but I already named it A, and then I type comma 1 to eliminate the zeros, and then I type comma. I move to the next line, Alt Enter. My next variable will count the number of columns in the returned array. That will be named D. I type comma, and I use the columns function. I want the columns of C. I hit the tab key, I close the bracket, and when I type a comma, I have a little problem. The autocorrect feature replaces it with a copyright. All what you need to do is to hit Ctrl Z, and then I hit Alt Enter. I type E, comma, that's my next variable, and this variable will be storing the number of rows in the returned array. So I use rows. I hit the tab key. I want the rows from B3 down to B9. I close the bracket, and then I type comma. I hit Alt Enter, and the final variable will be F, comma. This variable will be providing the row labels of the final report. Then it will be storing the range from B2 down to B9. If I type a comma at this position, the let function expects a calculation. But because I want to test the function, I'm going to test it by typing one of these variables. So if I type A just to test and I close the bracket, when I hit enter, it should return what you see in row number 12. Let's hit enter, and this is what we get. What if I put my let function in the edit mode, and instead of the A, I type a B? That will return what you see in row 13. What if I test it one more time by typing C? When I hit enter, then this is what it returns. That will be the top row of my final report. Let's test it one final time. Before moving to the next step, I want to test it with a D, and when I hit enter, it's returning 5. That's the number of columns I need in the final report. Now I want to move to the next step. How do I add the values for each client in each year? So I collapse the formula bar, and I go to the next worksheet concept to explain how am I going to do that. We created a variable named B, and I'm going to use this variable that will be stored in memory, and this variable is providing the year in the top row for the source data. We also created another variable that we named C that provides the column header a unique occurrence of each year for the final report. And my goal is to add conditionally, so in the selected cell corresponding to Adidas in 2017, I would like to add up the 3 numbers corresponding to Adidas from columns C to E. And I'm going to use an index function to do that. So if I type equal index and I hit the tab key, I want to select all this range, and then I type a comma. For this customer in row number 1, and just for testing, I'll be typing 1, and I want all the columns, then I type comma, and I don't type anything for the column number, and I close the bracket. What happens if I hit enter? Then I'm getting all the numbers in the top row. I don't want all the numbers. I just want the numbers for 2017. Then I need to create a certain function that returns a true only for 2017. And I put my function in the edit mode F2, and I'll be multiplying my first index function with a second index function. I open bracket and I type index. I want the index of this top row. Then I type comma. I skip this argument. I type another comma, and I type 1 for the first column, 2017. I close the bracket for this index function, If you want to test this index function, select it and hit F9. It's returning 2017. Let's undo Ctrl Z. And to convert it to a true and false, I'm going to compare it to the top row of the source data. So I say, if it is equal to the top row of the source data, that was my variable B. So I close the bracket, and now let's test. When I hit enter, I'll be getting the first three numbers corresponding to 2017. Other than that, I get a 0. I can put it in the edit mode F2, and if I test the second part only, by hitting F9, I get a bunch of trues and false. A true multiplied by a number returns the same number. Now I want to add up these numbers. I hit Ctrl Z, and I wrap the two index functions inside a sum function. I hit the tab key, I click at the end, I close the bracket. When I hit enter, I was able to add up the quantity for Adidas in 2017. Let's put the function in the edit mode one last time. For the first index function, I want to change this number as I go down from 1 to 7. Isn't that the variable I created and I named it E? For the second index function, I want this one to change to 2, to 3, to 4, to 5. So I'll be creating an array consisting of 7 rows and 5 columns. I'll be creating an array consisting of the variable E for the rows and the variable D for the columns. In this array, in each cell in this array, I'll be using this function, the sum with the index and the comparison. So let's go back to our let function. I put it in the edit mode F2. Let's expand the formula bar, Ctrl Shift U. I'm going to delete the closing bracket and the D, and I hit Alt Enter, and I start creating a makeArray function. The makeArray function returns a calculated array of a specific number of rows, which is the variable E, and a specific number of columns, which is the variable D, and it will be applying a lambda function, the sum, the index, and the index to each cell in this array. Let's create this part, make array, and then I hit tab. My array consists of a certain number of rows, which is E, 7. And then it consists of a certain number of columns, which is the variable that I named D, and then I type comma, and I create my lambda function. Lambda, and I hit tab. I'll be using two parameters, x, comma, y. And then I type a comma and the function. X corresponds to each row in the variable E. Y corresponds to each column in the variable D. So what's the function you want to apply to each cell in the array consisting of 7 rows and 5 columns? It's a sum. I hit tab, and then an index. I hit tab. I want the index of the range C3Q9, comma. What's the row number? That changes. So I use the variable x, and then comma, and I close the bracket for the first index function. I multiply it by the second index function, then I type a multiplication, I open bracket, and the second index function, I hit the tab key. This one will look in the top header of the report. This is the variable that shows the years without any duplicates, and we named it C. I don't want a row number, then I type another comma, and for the column number, I want each column in the variable D, then I use the y of the lambda function. Y represents each number in the variable D. I close the bracket for the second index function, and to convert the result into trues and false, I ask, is it equal to the top row that I created in memory and I named it B? And now I close the bracket for the second index function. I close the bracket for the sum function, I close the bracket for the lambda function, I close the bracket for the makeArray function, and I close the bracket for the let function. When I hit enter, I get the total quantity for each client in each year. To finalize my report, I need column headers, that will be the years, and I created this in a variable called C, that I want to put C on top of the make array, and I'll be using a vstack function to do that. I click before the make array, and I type vstack. I hit tab. What do you want to stack? I want the variable named C, and then I type a comma, and I close the bracket for the vstack function, and when I hit enter, I get the column headers, the years 2017, 18, and so on. Now the final thing in this report, I need the row labels. The row labels were stored in a variable that I named F. I'm going to put it side by side with the vstack function. Then I'll be using an hstack, a horizontal stack function. I put my function in the edit mode, and I click before the vstack function. I type hstack. I hit the tab key. What do you want to put side by side? I want a variable named F. I type a comma, and I click at the end. I close the bracket, and I hit enter. Et voila! I solved the problem. I created a beautiful single cell report with 14 levels of nesting. If you found value in this tutorial, give it a big thumbs up and make sure to subscribe to my channel to be notified when new tutorials are released. The best is yet to come. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.